My boss always said I was his best employee. He trusted me, assigned me important projects. And then he decided he could cheat me out of my money. He thought I would just accept it. But I turned his life into a nightmare. I remember the exact moment when Gary hired me at his luxury home renovation company in Austin. It was a scorching Texas afternoon, and he was showing me around the workshop, his charismatic smile never faltering as he laid out his vision. "We're not just fixing houses," he'd said, gesturing at the high-end materials surrounding us. "We're creating dreams for people who can afford them." The company was small but growing. We specialized in renovating million-dollar homes in the wealthiest neighborhoods of Austin, transforming already luxurious properties into something even more extravagant. Our clients were tech executives, successful entrepreneurs, and old-money families who didn't blink at six-figure renovation bills. I threw myself into the work. While Gary charmed clients with his smooth talk and perfectly tailored suits, I was the one who made sure everything actually happened. I managed our crew of skilled craftsmen, coordinated with suppliers, handled the permits, and kept our projects on schedule. When problems arose, and they always did in high-end construction, I was the one who found solutions. 7 years passed this way. I became Gary's right-hand man, the person he trusted with everything. "Without you," he'd tell me during our Friday evening planning sessions, "this whole operation would fall apart." He'd pour us both expensive whiskey from the crystal decanter he kept in his office, and we'd discuss upcoming projects like old friends. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The way he'd sometimes dodge questions about finances. How he'd changed accountants 3 times in 2 years. The subtle shift in his demeanor whenever certain clients called. But I was too close to see it clearly. Too invested in the idea that we were partners, even if my name wasn't on the company letterhead. The first delayed paycheck came with a perfectly reasonable explanation. "The Anderson project payment is held up," Gary said, looking appropriately concerned. "Just a temporary cash flow issue. You know how these things go." He even showed me the email from Mrs. Anderson's assistant, apologizing for the delay. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We'd worked together for 7 years. He'd been to my wedding. I'd helped him move when he divorced his second wife. Trust builds up over time, layer by layer, until it becomes as solid as the foundations we laid for our clients' homes. The second delayed paycheck came 2 weeks later. This time, it was a problem with the bank. Then it was an issue with the accounting software. Then a major client backing out of a project at the last minute. The excuses piled up like sawdust on a workshop floor, each one seemingly plausible on its own, but together forming a pattern I refused to see. 3 months passed. No paychecks. My savings were dwindling, and my wife was starting to worry. Meanwhile, Gary's lifestyle hadn't changed a bit. If anything, he was spending more than ever. A new Ford F-150 Platinum appeared in his parking spot. He posted photos from expensive restaurants on Instagram. Then came the pictures from his family vacation in Hawaii, sunset cocktails, beachfront dinners, helicopter tours of the islands. That's when something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It was more like the subtle crack that sometimes appears in drywall, barely visible at first, but signaling deeper structural problems. I started paying closer attention. Not just to the obvious things, but to the details Gary thought nobody noticed. The way he'd quickly close his laptop when someone walked into his office. The private phone calls he'd take in the parking lot. The subtle differences between the material invoices and what actually showed up at our job sites. Most importantly, I noticed how he'd started treating me differently. The friendly conversation stopped. No more whiskey-fueled planning sessions. He'd avoid eye contact in meetings, deflect my questions about money, and suddenly become very busy whenever I tried to pin him down about the missing paychecks. That's when I knew, he wasn't just having cash flow problems. He was systematically stealing from me, from our clients, from everyone. And he thought he could get away with it because he believed I was too loyal, too invested, or too afraid to do anything about it. He was wrong. The thing about working closely with someone for 7 years is that you learn all their secrets. Not because they tell you, because you see the patterns. You notice the inconsistencies. You understand the systems. And most importantly, you know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. I started my investigation quietly. While Gary was busy showing off his new truck to potential clients, I began documenting everything. Every invoice. Every receipt. Every contract. Every email. I stayed late at the office, carefully copying files and taking photos of documents. I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking the discrepancies between what clients were charged and what materials actually cost. The pattern was worse than I'd imagined. Gary wasn't just skimming a little off the top, he was running a sophisticated fraud operation. He'd charge clients premium prices for high-end materials but install cheaper alternatives. He'd pad labor costs by 30 to 40%. He'd even created fake supplier companies that existed only on paper, routing payments through them to hide his tracks. But that wasn't the worst of it. I discovered that he hadn't been paying our payroll taxes properly for years. He'd been pocketing the withholdings instead of sending them to the IRS. That's when I understood why he'd changed accountants so often. Anyone who looked too closely at our books would have spotted the fraud. I gathered evidence methodically, like a detective building a case. USB drives filled with documents. Screenshots of fraudulent transactions. Photographs of inferior materials being installed in luxury homes. Recordings of conversations where Gary promised clients specific high-end products that were never actually ordered. All the while, I maintained my usual work routine. I smiled in meetings. I coordinated projects. I even laughed at Gary's jokes. But inside, I was building something far more intricate than any of our renovation projects. I was constructing his downfall. The key was timing. Rush it, and I'd risk missing something crucial. Move too slowly, and Gary might realize what I was doing. I needed everything to align perfectly for maximum impact. First, I identified our 3 biggest clients, the Andersons, who'd spent over $800,000 on their home renovation, the Patels, who were in the middle of a $1.2 million project, and the Richardsons, who were about to sign a contract for a complete home remodel worth nearly $2 million. I created separate dossiers for each client, documenting exactly how Gary had cheated them. The Andersons imported Italian marble that was actually from a domestic quarry. The Patels custom-made cabinetry that was really mass-produced overseas. The Richardsons, exclusive, design plans that Gary had recycled from 3 other projects. Then I waited for the perfect moment. It came during our annual client appreciation event, where Gary always showed off ongoing projects to potential new customers. He was in his element, champagne glass in hand, regaling a group of prospects with stories about his commitment to quality and uncompromising standards. I chose that evening to send 3 carefully crafted emails, one to each of our major clients. Each message was detailed, professional, and devastating. I included copies of real invoices next to the inflated ones Gary had sent them. Photos of the materials they'd paid for compared to what was actually installed. Documentation of every lie, every substitution, every fraud. The response was immediate and explosive. Mrs. Anderson called Gary during the party, screaming so loudly that everyone could hear her through his phone. Mr. Patel showed up at the event in person, waving printouts of my email and demanding answers. The Richardsons' lawyer contacted us first thing the next morning. Gary's carefully constructed world began to crumble. But this was just the beginning of my plan. The real devastation was yet to come. The morning after the client appreciation event, Gary called an emergency meeting. His usual smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. He paced the conference room, alternating between threats and pleas. "Someone is trying to sabotage us," he announced, his voice shaking. "They're spreading lies about our business. I need everyone's help to contain this situation." His eyes lingered on me for a moment, but I met his gaze steadily, my face a mask of concerned professionalism. "Of course we'll help, Gary," I said, taking notes as if this were any other meeting. "What do you need us to do?" He outlined a desperate plan to save the company. We would offer discounts to angry clients. We would create new documentation showing that material substitutions had been properly approved. We would blame suppliers for any discrepancies. In short, we would pile new lies on top of old ones. I nodded along, knowing that none of it would matter. Because while Gary was trying to patch the holes in his sinking ship, I had already launched the torpedo that would tear it completely apart. 3 days earlier, I had mailed a thick envelope to the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. Inside was a detailed report of Gary's tax fraud, complete with documentation showing years of unpaid payroll taxes, hidden income, and falsified returns. I included copies of the fake supplier companies he'd created, bank statements showing the diverted funds, and a timeline of his scheme. But I hadn't stopped there. I also sent copies to the Texas State Board of Contractors, the Better Business Bureau, and the State Attorney General's office. Each package was carefully customized for the recipient, focusing on the specific laws and regulations Gary had violated under their jurisdiction. The next week was like watching a slow-motion car crash. The Andersons filed a lawsuit. The Patels demanded a full audit of their project. The Richardsons not only canceled their contract but also reported us to the state licensing board. Other clients, hearing rumors of problems, began calling with questions about their own projects. Gary's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking during the day, keeping a bottle of bourbon in his desk drawer. He would alternate between fits of rage and periods of eerie calm. Sometimes he would stare out his office window for hours, as if trying to spot the approaching storm on the horizon. I maintained my role as the steady, reliable employee. I stayed late, helping to gather documents for the lawyers. I reassured worried staff members. I even defended Gary to clients, all while knowing that each passing day brought us closer to the inevitable crash. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, reviewing project timelines, when I heard the commotion in the lobby. 4 agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, accompanied by 2 state investigators, walked into our office. They carried badges, search warrants, and the weight of federal law enforcement behind them. Gary emerged from his office, his face ashen. "What's going on?" he asked, though the tremor in his voice suggested he already knew. The lead agent stepped forward. "Mr. Gary Thompson. We have some questions about your tax returns and business practices." I watched as they led Gary to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see him gesturing frantically, probably trying to charm his way out of trouble one last time. But these weren't wealthy clients he could manipulate with smooth talk and fake invoices. These were federal agents with subpoenas and forensic accountants. They spent hours going through our files, copying hard drives, and interviewing staff. I answered their questions truthfully, playing the role of the shocked and cooperative employee. Yes, I had access to the financial records. No, I hadn't known about the tax fraud. Yes, I had noticed some irregularities recently, which was why I had started documenting everything. Late that afternoon, as the agents were boxing up evidence, Gary finally figured it out. I was gathering my things to leave when he appeared in my office doorway. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes had the haunted look of a man watching his life unravel. "It was you," he said quietly. Not a question. A realization. I looked up from my computer, my expression neutral. What was me, Gary? All of it. The clients. The investigations. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? His voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the rage building beneath it. I stood up slowly, gathering my laptop and the last few personal items from my desk. "You know what your mistake was, Gary?" I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. "You thought loyalty only went one way. You expected it from everyone else, but you never gave it in return." He took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "I made you. You were nothing before I hired you." "No, Gary," I replied calmly. "I made you. I ran your projects, managed your crews, kept your clients happy. And when you decided to stop paying me, I unmade you. It's just business, right? Isn't that what you always said?" An agent appeared in the doorway behind Gary. "Is everything okay in here?" "Everything's fine," I said, smiling. "I was just leaving." I walked past Gary, but paused in the doorway. "By the way, those last 3 months of salary you owe me? Don't worry about it. This was worth every penny." The company's collapse was spectacular. The federal investigation revealed over $3.2 million in tax fraud. The state licensing board revoked Gary's contractor license. Civil lawsuits from angry clients piled up faster than his lawyers could handle them. I watched it all from a comfortable distance. I had already moved on, taking several of our best craftsmen with me to start my own renovation company. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building my success on the ruins of Gary's failure, just as he had tried to build his wealth by cheating others. 6 months later, I ran into him at a gas station. He was driving for Uber now, his designer suits replaced by khakis and a polo shirt. Our eyes met across the pumps, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old Gary, the charming manipulator who thought he could talk his way out of anything. But then his shoulders slumped, and he quickly looked away. I watched him drive off in his used Camry, thinking about how different things might have been if he'd just done the right thing. I'm not proud of what I did. Revenge doesn't bring the kind of satisfaction people think it will. It doesn't heal the wound of betrayal or restore broken trust. But sometimes, it does teach a valuable lesson. My new company is thriving. We do honest work, use quality materials, and pay our people well. Every Friday, I still have a drink in my office while reviewing the week's projects. But I keep the whiskey in a simple glass bottle, not a crystal decanter. And sometimes, when I'm signing payroll checks, I think about Gary. I wonder if he ever understood that his downfall wasn't really about the money he owed me. It was about the trust he broke, the loyalty he betrayed, and the lesson he learned too late. In business, as in life, your reputation is built on the promises you keep, not the ones you make.